Hi guys, it's Coach Anthony back at you with another edition of Animate, bringing chess to life. Continuing on the theme of indirect attack, today we will examine another basic winning position, king and rook versus king. In this position, the main idea is to checkmate the black king. How do we do this? Well, once again, we need to push the black king to the edge of the board, namely the A file, 8th rank, H file, or the first rank. And as we can see, the king is most probably closest to the H file and not too far away from the 8th rank, roughly about 3 squares in between, as we can see here. So trying to push the king to any one of these edges of the board wouldn't be a bad idea at all. Unfortunately, unlike the king and queen position, where we had the queen that could push the king to the edge of the board all by itself, we have a rook, which is the second most powerful piece, but can't do the same thing. However, some of the techniques you've seen before are still useful. After all, a queen is a rook plus a bishop. So we notice the black king is on the 5th rank. So you guessed it, we're going to move our rook to the 4th rank and cut off the black king. Well, once again, the black king has got very few options. One of those options is to remain on the 5th rank. Another option is to be very obliging and step backwards for us onto the 6th rank, which makes our job much easier. But as much as the king can stay on the 5th rank, there's also something else it could do which it couldn't do previously, and that is it can dare to eventually attack our rook. You see, the king is only truly frightened of one piece, and that's the queen. Right, so black's turn to move. The most toughest thing it could do is come after our rook. No problem, because it's going to take a bit of time before it can do that. So we use that time to mobilize our king, and as soon as our rook's attacked, well, we have to save it. The most important thing is to remember to swing to the other side of the board and say to the black king, catch me if you can. Well, the black king once again begins to chase after our rook, and then we reach a critical position. Right now, the black king has a very difficult choice to make. It can either stay on the 5th rank, as we said before, or move backwards and make our job easier. If the king decides to run to the square G5, then it's getting closer to the H file. So its strongest move here is to go to the square E5. But once we have this magical opposition, or as I like to call it, face off, where the kings are face to face, because kings are not allowed to be next to each other. Once this happens, it becomes very easy to push the king backwards, and we do that by simply giving a check on the 5th rank, and then the black king discovers it can't go anywhere but up towards the 6th rank. So has to happen. And then if we're able to get an L shape away from the king with our own king, it's useful in this position. What do I mean by that? Well, if the king was to step to the side to the square D6, then once again we'd have that face-off position, and it would be very easy to push the black king back to the 7th rank. So it doesn't really leave many options for the black king. All it can do to escape its inevitable capture is to move to the square f6. And once it moves to the square f6, we then chase with our king and say, come back here please and give me face off. So the king runs away some more. And once again we say, come back here please and give me face off. Well, the king has either a choice to go to the H file, which is what we want, give me face off, or step backwards. Well, I guess maybe stepping backwards is what the king tried. So once again, if we're able to, well, as it steps backwards, sorry, I should say, the first thing we need to do is to actually cut off the king. Because it stepped back to the 7th rank, we now cut off the king, so making sure that it cannot pass the 6th rank. Now, we would like to get face off, but in this case, it's a bit more difficult now to get face off, because if we go an L shape away, then the king will once again march along its way and then try to attack our rook. But this is not a problem, it's not a major problem. So we try to get face off, but obviously the king marches towards our rook. Now, there's a little idea here, and that is, if we imagine that the board was split in half, like, let's just get an arrow here, board split in half, like this, then what we can see is that the king is headed towards the rook. So our idea is to swing our rook away from the king, as far away from the king as possible, to then try and get face off. So let's see that in action. So we swing our rook over to the other side, and now the king does not want to go to the square e7, because that means it will give us face off. What are the black king's other choices? Well, it could step backwards, which as we see makes our job easier, or the only other thing it can do is move to the square c7. Well, that's its best move to the square c7. So now we can just chase and demand face off. Once again, all the king can do is step backwards or give us face off. Once again, we demand, come back here and give us face off. And now the king is forced to go either to the A file or the 8th rank, which is exactly what we want. If the king decides to go to the 8th rank, first thing we do is cut off the king, making sure it's stuck on the 8th rank and it can't go anywhere. It's officially in a much wider cage of doom, because it's got quite a few squares it can run to. Unlike when we had the king and queen position, there were limited squares it could go to, but right now it's still in a roomier cage of doom. So black king gets to run. We demand face off. Now, in this situation, once again, the king can either come towards the rook or away from the rook. If the king steps towards the rook, what do? Hopefully you've got it by now. We swing the rook to the opposite side of the board. If the king steps away from the rook, then we just need to waste one move with our rook. So let's see that in action. King steps away. We waste the move. Why do we waste that move? Because now the king has only got a few choices. It can either give us what we want, which is face off, or run away. It's as simple as that. The strongest move for the king is to run away, but by now you know what we do. We chase that black king and say, come back here and give us face off. Unfortunately, the king has to run into the corner. Once again, we chase and we say, come back here and give us face off. But now there is no other choice, You have to give us what we want. And once we have this position, then there's a check on g8, which ends the game. In this next position, it's black's turn to move, and I'd like you to pause your video and work out what move you would make for the black team. I'm back. Let's check the answer. One of the first things that we're going to do here is notice the white king and where it's positioned. We see it's on the square h6, which quite simply means it's on the 6th rank and also on the h file. But hold on a minute, isn't the h file one of the places we would like the king to get to? So that means it's already on the edge of the board. All we need to do is keep it on the edge of the board. So how will we do that? Hopefully you found the move rook to g2. Maybe some of you found the move rook to b5 with the idea of pushing the white king back towards the 8th rank. If you chose this is okay as well, because you will eventually still get to the same goal. However, rook to g2 is a lot faster and a lot easier, because now we have that white king already in the cage of doom. Well, all the white king can do is head towards our rook. We're going to bring our king in to help us. The white king is going to head towards our rook. Give me face off. The king says no and attacks our rook. What do we do here? You remembered. Catch me if you can. We swing the rook all the way over to the other side of the board and ask the white king if it really wants to give us face off. Of course the answer is no, so the white king runs away. But we chase after it and say, come back here, I'd like face off please. King runs and hits the corner, and then we say, oh yes, you definitely have to come back. And so the white king comes back, gives us face off, we give them a check on the H file, which ends the game. So in summary, the king and rook must work together in order to push your opponent's king to the edge of the board where you'll be able to deliver checkmate. There are different techniques which will achieve the same result. However, the key is to practice so that you're comfortable. If you happen to be the side with the lone king, then stay away from the edges of the board. Head to the middle of the board for as long as possible. Please like and subscribe, and see you all on the next video.